Hello folks, this is Mighty Scun here with another episode of Feed the Beast Revelation, and we are now on episode 16, and today's episode will be about power generation, and most likely the next couple episodes will be about power generation. But first we will get to the changes. So the changes we have, as you can see on my list here, the first thing is I went to the desert, and I can pull up my map here. You should now be able to see my mouse. So I'm here, and it's nighttime, so things are spawning. The desert is up here. I got the Nature's Compass out and searched for biome, and this is the closest one. Then I did find, I got some sand and I got some cactus. I mostly went there for the green dye. I wanted to get a replenishable resource of green dye for the ender tanks and the ender chests. I did find several big temples, and I think this is a swamp biome. And I found they're underwater, which is pretty neat looking. So I did do a lot of looting. I did find a village, and I activated a waystone. So there's a waystone that we can get into in the near future. So let's just get out of this, and I'll show you. The next thing I also did was build some SNAD, and so SNAD is a mod that allows you to build the SNAD block. Let's pull up SNAD. There's two versions. There's, of course, the red SNAD and the regular SNAD, and it's just two sand blocks together, and all it does is just increases the growth rate of whatever's on top of it. So the cactuses are now being fertilized by the SNAD. The next change is hammer upgrades. I wanted to point out a really good combination that I feel is probably what I'll stick with for a while, and that is the combination of the Petra armor, which comes from my handle, and that is a Ardite handle, and then we have an obsidian plate. I replaced my copper plate. It was taking probably 15 or so copper to actually repair this thing, and so I didn't like that, and I like continuing that process, even though I have enough copper now to do it, but I just replaced it with an obsidian one. And obsidian gives you the durability trait, and that is essentially reinforcement. So it's like in Minecraft, it's the plate that I put on here is obsidian, and that durability trait is correspondent to unbreaking. And so in Minecraft, you can add unbreaking 1, 2, 3. It adds a chance of 30%, maybe it's 33%, to not take durability loss. So that's what I've added to this, and if you look in your book, Materials and You, there's actually we can increase that with these reinforced plates. So it's essentially a pattern with obsidian surrounding it. So that's really easy to do, and actually I do have a modifier. I actually leveled this up, so we are now on the comfortable level, and the traits of durability and Petra armor combined allow us to have a chance to not lose durability and also repair itself. So when I'm breaking stone, there's a 10% chance to repair. That's become a really good combination if you ever need to have a tool that you don't feel like repairing on a regular basis. Combine these two, especially on a hammer. So I will build the reinforcement, and then we will have even further upgrades for that. Okay, I've smelted my aluminum brass, and you can just pour it out with nothing in there, and it's pretty fast. Then the recipe is just like I showed you earlier, just obsidian surrounded by a cast, and then you can drop your hammer and increase reinforcement. So it's 20%. So you would need to get 5 of these, or you'd have to have dirty plus just probably 3 of these, and you'd probably have more than enough to handle mining for long periods of time. So this is going to be very helpful in the long run. Okay, the next thing on the list is the basement. I feel like every time I complete an episode, I want to fix a part of the house. So let's go to the basement. And so I did some designing of the walls, and I've also added a lot more stuff. As you can see, I just filled up this wall with mob drops. And so what I did was I created a ender chest that now gets mob drops from up in the rooms up there. They now feed into this. And as you can see, we have lots of stuff just being dropped into here. So it's kind of an automated process to have drops being stored here. What will probably happen in the very near future is I'll probably push this wall out more. So we'll dig further into the mountain, and I'll just fill the wall up even more, so then I will have the maximum range of this block here, because there is some overlap within a few rows here. So that's the plan, but this is the basement. It's been changed, and we will continue changing things. Okay, on to the main event. So this episode and probably the next episode, I would like to talk about mid-game power. And of course, there are a lot of mods, and there are a lot of mods that produce power. So what we'll do is I'll just talk about the different types of power, and then we will progress through that. And I do also want to get into power cells early on, because I've built a few of these and placed them throughout the base. And so I will get into an explanation of what these do and why I prefer this over many other options for wireless power transportation. So for mid-game power, I've kind of categorized it into the wood/charcoal, and also lava, and refined fuel, and canola. And when I say refined fuel, that also includes the biogas and stuff like that, and then diesel. There's a lots of different kinds of refined fuels, and canola oil is sort of in that same category, where you would have to process it in a order to increasingly get more RF from that bucket of oil. So they're all essentially listed as refined fuels. But what I'm going to do is, over the next episode, or maybe 2, or maybe even 3, I will build each system and then kind of talk about the benefits of each system and then the downside of each system. So the first one is the wood charcoal, which we've already set up. This is early game stuff. This requires very little to get these going, and I've already talked about this in a previous episode, so I won't go too much into detail on these particular generators, but there are definitely other generators. There's an Actual Editions one, which of course is just very simple. It produces a pretty good amount of RF. And there's an RF Tools one. I think each mod pack essentially has a type of generator that does this. There's Extra Utilities one from Survival. It's called a Survival Generator. They all have their pros, they all have their cons. Now I do want to point out that there are different types of energy. There is RF, which is primarily what most mods use nowadays. There's also an energy source called Tesla, which will convert directly to RF. There's no machine that needs to convert it, it's either going to run on an RF conduit like this, so we can convert Tesla blocks into RF by just putting conduits or even machines that use RF next to them. So there's no difference, but there is also EU, and EU is specifically industrial craft stuff. So if you're going to do industrial craft, which I typically do, I do like industrial craft. I do like a lot of the flexibility that it offers and it does offer a lot of machines. But there is also EU, and so we won't go into EU today. I also wanted to mention that we will focus primarily on mid-game and not end-game. So mods like Deep Resonance and Extreme Reactors, and even though Extreme Reactors you can get into early game stuff, as well as Nuclear Craft, which I consider an end game. It takes a lot of resources to get up and going, even though there is early and mid game stuff within Nuclear Craft. We're going to steer clear of that mod pack for now, but we will do another series where we actually tackle the end game stuff. Other mods like Draconic Evolution, which produces RF, and so those, and of course, Industrial Craft, which has early, mid, and late game systems that you can put in place, but it's a separate power generation system. So we will still clear those mods in this particular series. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I will talk about transportation as well, which is not on the list per se. There is a thing in here about power cells, but I do want to talk about transportation because you do get into instances where you can have the best systems set up, but then your transportation is bad enough to where it is limiting your entire system you set up. So as we progress through the power generation and we hit limitations, then I will talk about it at that point. Okay, so what we're going to do now is talk about the petrified generator. This is, I would say, the end game of charcoal, and the reason why I say that is because we have one set up here, and I just built these two pulverizers to drain power and do things for me. But we have one here. It is from industrial foregoing, and what it does, it produces Tesla, so that's a T, which, like I said before, will directly translate into RF. But as you see here, it says 800 Tesla per tick, so 800 RF per tick, and a burn time of 21 seconds. The reason why I say this is endgame is because very few blocks, especially coal and wood generators, will produce 800 RF per tick. Like even some of the highest maxed out dynamos, which we'll talk about later, from thermal expansion, will not produce 800 RF per tick. So this block is very unique in that it is definitely a coal generator, and it's a mid-game block because it does require diamond and it requires gold. And the interesting thing about this, which you can read more about in the Industrial Foregoings Manual, is that depending on which block you throw in there, it will adjust the amount of output. So the burn time will always be 50 seconds. So you put a block of, you put one of these in there, and it will have a specific burn time, which I have it turned on, or I have it set to activate without a redstone signal. So, and right now it's on. If I flip it to off, this will activate and produce power, which I'll do. So it's going to produce 800 RF per tick, and it fills up its thing fast. So this block is unique in that it reverses the way it handles power generation for coal. Most blocks will change the burn time and produce a certain amount of RF, but at a steady RF per tick. So these will always do 40 no matter what I have in the slot. These will adjust the RF per tick and the burn time will remain the same. So you can do interesting things with this. Since it's always going to be 50 seconds, it'll always be there's always 20 ticks in a second. You can do timers that can kick off with this. You can also do what I do here is there are other blocks that let you turn off and on depending on how much energy is filled in this buffer, which I usually do that. I usually have a block, and the block that I typically use is, oops, I always do that, RF. The block that I typically use is the, it's an energy, what is it called? It's the energy, okay, so we have RF monitor. So this block will let us monitor the RF in a block next to it. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to build this and kind of show you the setup that I typically run to when I'm using stuff like these generators. And the reason why I do this is because when you run this thing and it fills up, it still wastes time. So you're still burning pretty much RF. And that stinks. You're essentially wasting energy right now, and there's no way to limit that unless you implement one of these RF monitors. And so I will build an RF monitor, and I will come back and show you how this works. Okay, I am back, and I wanted to show you the different materials and burn rates, and then I actually built my block, and I'll explain how this works in a second. But I did want to show you that I'm draining energy and that this produces 50 seconds of burn time at 15 per tick. So using this inside of this is not a very good way to produce energy. It does get you more energy in the long run than this will. But the 15 RF per tick is very low, and there's a lot of blocks that can do this passively, and so it's not a good use. You can also throw in a charcoal. You can also throw in a charcoal block. The charcoal block is what I had, producing 800 Tesla per tick, and the charcoal will produce, I think it's, 80. Okay, I was thinking 60, but yeah, 80 RF per tick. Still pretty good. It's still equal to 2 of these. Okay, I am back, and I have now built I have an RF monitor, and I also have some redstone relays into structural ducts. And so, as you can see, what I did is I actually clicked on the generator, and I set it to active on redstone signal. So the inversion thing was not working too well, but I tried to invert the signal, and so this is actually seems like this is working. If there's less than 50% of energy, then power this thing on. And so this thing is only active when a redstone signal is powering it, and so right now we are full. So what I'm going to do is I am actually going to, let's drain this down. I need more stuff. Let's throw in some more of this, which I'll use for steel, so it's not wasting. Okay, I'm back, and I actually got a smaller cell to test with because I got tired of trying to fill this thing up to a certain percentage. So what I want to do now is, back here, I have my duct with a redstone relay in that one, and this block is actually looking at the energy cell. And so it's saying if this energy cell has less than 20% of its power, send out a redstone signal. And I put it this low because the energy cell, I don't want to fill it up. I want to be able to demonstrate a couple of things. And so 20% of its power, so we have to get to that point. And I set this to active on redstone signal. So it will be active on a redstone signal. And so this block essentially will send out a redstone signal until it hits 20%, and then it'll stop. So with this combination of things, we should get we'll throw a block in there. We should fastly get to our 20% mark, which should be, okay, it went over a little bit, but so 400,000, and it stops. So we can bump this up to, let's say, 30%, 31%. Let's do that for now. So this will fill up, and we will see we're stopped. So what you can do in order to set these up to where they're not wasting power, you're not wasting per tick, is you make a bunch of these. Then essentially you have this block, the RF monitor, looking at the cell that they're all filling up. So if you have and you don't need to use these ducts, if you have power coming out of these machines, you can actually just use the regular power conduits. And so let's say we have like 4 or 5 of these lined up here. You can use the regular power conduits, so the duct. So you can use the leadstone, or you can use the hardened. The hardened uses a higher rate of transfer. This, you can only pretty much power to one machine, and then the other one will start losing power or start backing up power. So you don't want to use these. You want to go with this, and this will let you power 5 machines. So we can get 5 machines going with these, and of course you probably have to quickly upgrade or figure out another way to input into a different side. You can upgrade to RF, and eventually you can upgrade to the resonant flux ducts, which is 25,000 RF. So you can build 5 of these. They each require a diamond, and set it up with the RF monitor to monitor the cell. And I would actually set this up, if you have a big cell like this one, 90% is probably good, because when all those tick the next second, it will dump the power, and of course there's no internal storage in here. It'll dump everything into the cell and tick up. So depending on how much you have left in there, it'll tick up, and how many of these you're powering. So 90%, maybe you want to go with a lower value, or if you bump this up to the highest tier, I think the maximum you can get these cells up to is 150,000. And so once you get to that tier, then you're going to be able to allow yourself to have some room for the next tick. So this thing ticks up, it'll dump the rest of its power and stop. So that's how I set these up, and I will set up these in the future as kind of a reserve. So if one of the cells gets to, let's say, 20%, one of my big cells, my main power that's powering a huge section of the base, is get down to 20%. These things will then kick in. I'll have a stack, probably one of these drawers filled with blocks, with charcoal blocks, so I can kick up 800. So I can kick into 800 RF per tick per generator, and maybe have 5. So it's like a quick burst of 4,000 RF per tick, which sometimes you need that, sometimes you don't, depending on what you're running. I may go to 50%. It just depends. You have to just, now that you know the basics, you will have to just learn what your base needs and how many power spikes and what power spikes and adjust from there. But it's super easy to adjust this. You can just go up to any level you want, 50%, and then all your generators will kick in and fill your cell up to 50%, which these small ones will go fast. So we should get to 1,000,000 here, and then this thing will stop. Actually, I think I won't be able to get to 1,000,000 because this thing only produces, well, maybe I will. Okay. Boom, 1,000,000. So it ticked over 5,400, which is probably what was just left in this, in these, the next tick between each one. So, so the last second went through, and now we have 5 seconds left. And so I think you see how this build's going to work. You have the drawer feeding in the charcoal blocks, and then you have each one of your machines being controlled by the RF monitor, which is monitoring your energy cell for whatever percentage you set it at. This is, I think, a really good supplementary system, and there's a lot of supplementary systems you can build in case you get into these dips of power where you're running multiple quarries at the same time, or you're outputting a lot of power to one of the later machines that uses up, you know, hundreds of, or maybe even a couple of thousand RF per tick. So those are good ways to supplement your power, and you could eventually have this as your main power source, where it's just constantly draining and then refilling your energy cells. So there's multiple options, but this is essentially what I call the wood charcoal section. This is the end game of wood charcoal, and this is the early game of wood charcoal. So this is the entire wood charcoal system, and of course you can still use these in the end game, and still 800 RF per tick is an amazing amount of power coming from one block. So much so that you're going to have to quickly upgrade your ducts to support it. Okay, I am back, and I actually went ahead and built the setup that I was talking about, where it will essentially read from this. So it's reading the value, and I have the value set at 40%. So it's reading the value from here. And if I increase this value, it'll run these machines. And so we have them all, they're paused at 10 seconds. This thing was empty, so they're now paused at 10 seconds. This one's 8 seconds, 10, 10, and so on and so forth. So this is the setup, and like I said before, you can run the redstone relays on these, and it actually will run on all of the ductwork. Now, I did find out that if you have, let's say, two different kinds of flux ducts, like you have one here and then you have another one right there that separates, this thing does not like going into another flux duct. I think what it does is it actually looks for the next connector. So it looks for connectors, and if there's a connector, which if you combine two flux ducts together, it will create a connector, and it'll stop there. It won't read the signal. It won't send the signal out to the rest of these. So just a food for thought. Whenever you're setting those up, you want to make sure that it's a continuous pattern, or continuous pipe all the way to the output connector. And I'll just run this to, let's say, 56%. That's fine. So we're now getting power. These things are ticking down. Oh, we're already there. Wow. These have a lot of energy. Let's go to 68. There we go. This thing has 2 RF in it, and this one's, yeah. So that is it. And so I can, they'll only run when it gets below a certain level. And of course, this is all being fed into this. So this one's so these are all linked together. This one is linked together. And I had one over here. Oh, I borrowed it for this test. And let's make this one in. Let's get rid of this. This is the next thing we're going to talk about, is actually these power cells. So all the power cells, they are from RF tools, and they have the inputs and outputs. You can switch them with, like this, you can switch them on each side independently, or you can click a button. You can say none, which they will now have no in or out, and then you'll have in, and they will now accept from all sides, and out does the same thing. So in order to make these, which I have, if you look at the side here, they each one of these has 1 million, and when you link them together, which linking them together is essentially dropping this card with a link ID that is equivalent to a link ID. So these two have link ID 1. As you can see, I have 4 million RF, which means I actually have 4 of these in the base. And so I'm going to go ahead and make another one for you. They are not that bad to make, and they are power cells. There are 4 different kinds, but this is creative, so we won't count that one. There is a simple power cell, which requires 2 diamonds, and then a machine block, and then redstone. And the difference, there's not much of a difference between these two. But there is a cheaper recipe where you save some redstone if you use the simple power cell. But then you're still wasting diamonds. This essentially would cost 3 diamonds then, instead of just 1 diamond and an emerald. So in my mind, that's kind of a waste. I would rather save the diamonds and spend the extra redstone, since redstone is easier to get. And let's grab some diamonds. Actually, I need an emerald, so let's grab one of those. And prismarine shards. Okay, so prismarine shards are not that bad to get. You just grab some nether quartz. We go upstairs to our atomic reconstructor, and we can then convert it into prismarine shards. See? So instead of having to go out in the ocean and look for one of those underwater temples and all that stuff, you can just convert your nether quartz into prismarine shards using the atomic reconstructor. So don't let that part of the recipe scare you. And now we can make some blocks. I think I need 4 of these. And I also need to make I think another block. Yeah, machine frame. Let's go grab that. And there we go. And there we go, our power cell. Now you will also want to make a power cell card. Not required for this for it to work. It will still function. So you can still let it function. It will still gain power. You are limited to 1 million. But honestly, these things are just way better when you actually have them linked together, because they do they share the same pool of energy, and I will demonstrate that as soon as I make this card, which I get paper for. Let's put all paper in this container, and let's make a card. Alright, now this card, it says it is unlinked, so it has no ID associated with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to link it together, which all you need to do is go to the nearest power cell, which mine's upstairs here. You drop it into the link section. So you have this one up here, which is the one that you store for this block. Then you can link it, and what it does is it duplicates the ID. So now we have a linked card. And you can do a stack of these if you want, if you feel like just making it easier to grab. So now what we do, I think you can just right click on it, yeah, and it'll stick it in here. And you see the power jumped to 5 million. Now it's filling up. So what it's doing is it's oops, come on. What it's doing is it's pulling from here. So it's actually being filled up from here, and this is draining, and actually here too. So this pulling from both sides, from here and from there. So since these are all linked together with a pool of 5 million now, you can now have these to where if, so let's say this thing drains and it starts draining this cell, and then this one will start draining because they're both feeding in at the same time. Then when this one gets to a certain point, these will kick in and pump back into the system here. So if this is being drained by these two systems, you're going to get a boost. You're going to get that 4,000 RF per tick boost, which I did make the correct flux ducts for that. So these flux ducts will only support 5 of these. And I guess I could have another input coming into this block here. I think those work the same way, but so we have these kicking in and these things draining. And you don't need to have this one in the middle. You can actually connect this block RF monitor into this block right here, and then you'd have, of course, you just remove this energy cell and place this right here. And this block would read from that, and then these would just directly fire into this block right here, so the power cell. You could do that. I like having a buffer. I always like having buffers for these, because right now the limit is 5 million, and I would rather have the extra buffer that I know that if these ever fail for some reason, I still have a 18 million RF limit here and like a 4 million RF limit there. So having a buffer is really nice. So these have another feature, which is, of course, you saw they are all linked together and it's all wireless. So there's no wires required. I can actually put this anywhere within a certain range. So there's the caveat that there's a certain range, and if I turn this into output, you'll see at the very bottom of that tooltip up there, it says side output cost is 0.0%. So if we go a distance, I'm not sure how far away it is, but I know it's probably like out here. I'm thinking like out here. Okay, so I went to the mining dimension, and this is my wall. I usually put up walls around it. I don't know if you've seen this yet, but I did get it to show a cost. So it's 1.6% loss of power in another dimension. So the requirements for these must have drastically lowered. It used to be a cap at 10%. So as soon as you cross the dimension, it would change, and it actually may be the configurations that are defaulted for this mod pack that is doing this. So you may just want to monitor that. But there is another feature to those. Let's go back to our base. I do like these portals way better than the nether portals. The other feature is that you can actually infuse them. And so you can infuse them, and infusion, you see right here, it says infused below the power level bar on the top center of the screen. It says infused 0%. So there is in RF tools, there is a infusion machine. Let's just type in infusion. Is this it over here? Yeah, machine infuser. Oh, they have ender pearls now? I wonder if that works. Huh. Oh, these dimensional shards are expensive to make. So this is the recipe for the dimensional shards. And so you need the dimensional shards to actually craft this. And you also need these to actually power this machine. So it's not a cheap way to boost up these things. So what I typically do with infusion is I will get one of the bigger ones, the highest tier, which is the advanced power cells. They store 4 million blocks. And when you infuse them to 100%, the extraction cost goes to 0. So there's no loss to 0 at the maximum level. And also the output and input increases. So you can actually do, I think it's like I'm going to say 50% max increase. So this would be 7,500 RF per tick. And the bigger ones may go up to 15,000 RF per tick. Though I'm not 100% sure if that's correct or not. It's been a while since I've seen those. But if you infuse the big ones and you still link them to ID1, you can mix and match the IDs. You can put IDs in any one of these. As long as it's the same ID1, they use the same cards, they will all combine the pool of power. So what you do then is you infuse this one, and this could be your external cross-dimensional power for your entire base. Everything's being powered back in your main base, and you're transferring it wirelessly across dimensions using these. So I like these power cells because they are essentially just like the ender chests and ender tanks. So ender tanks are for liquid, ender chests are for items, and then the power cells are for energy. So they work cross-dimensional. They are very efficient. Like you just saw, you cross a dimension and you only lose 1.6%, which I might just set up the quarry on the other mining dimension and just start using that. And then start feeding my backup power system here with the proper amount of stuff to get it going. So that's power cells. They are definitely flexible. So that is it for the first part of the series, the power production, or power generation. We will pick up on the next episode, and I think, we'll do lava, dynamos, and probably refined fuel. We'll try to get all three of those done, and I will do a lot of prep work before then. So I thank you for watching, and I definitely appreciate that. Goodbye.